Welcome to Research for Authors, subtitled No, You Cannot Make It All Up. And it is our sponsoring group is the IBMG, the Independent Book Marketing Group. Independent Book Marketing Group is just a bunch of authors who are trying to find the best ways to sell their books. If you go to their website, which is independentbookmarketinggroup.com, you can sign up for their newsletter, which comes out every 2 or 3 weeks. And you can check as often as you like. What we've done is the site aggregates blog posts from some of the best book marketers around, like John Kramer, who wrote 1,000 Ways to Market Your Book, and Penny Sansevieri. So if you go to their group, you can see the latest blog posts from people like that. And you'll also find our webinars archived there. So just to introduce myself, my name is Vicki Columbacco. I use Vicki Col on my books because Columbacco is hard to spell. My writing chops are that I am a freelance writer with a passion for history. So I went back to school in my 40s and I got an MA in American history, which entailed 2 solid years of nothing but research. I've written one historical novel on ancient Gaul. I'm midway through another. And I'm finishing up a book of baby boomer trivia. All these were heavily researched. And I've done a number of articles for magazines like Westways and Boys Life, for encyclopedias and for book series, some textbooks even, and most of them were on history. So I do research as much as I write. I do even more research.
But you're not 40 yet.
That's nice of you. Anyway, I want to spend the first couple of slides convincing you that research is important, no matter what you're writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, fantasy, memoir, poetry. Research always matters to each and every writer. And I'm going to give you 2 big reasons. The first one is that it prevents dumb mistakes. I'm going to give you 3 examples of the dumb mistakes reason. If you're writing a memoir, you may very well think, hey, I'm writing my own story. It's my life. I know what happened. I don't need no stinking research. But you're wrong, because memory plays us false often. I have a story that I use with permission. A good friend of mine who has written many nonfiction articles and books, she's now writing a fictional romance set in the 1970s. Now, she knows the 1970s. She grew up and left home in the 1970s, joined the dating scene, went out and started to make her way in the world. She met her husband in the 1970s. She built a life for herself in the 1970s. And so she relied on her memory for a lot of the story. And in her story, a woman goes to a pharmacy in 1975 and buys a home pregnancy test. Well, it's a big mistake. There were no home pregnancy tests available anywhere, not in pharmacies, not in thrifties, not until 78 or 79. And I pointed this out to her, and she couldn't believe she'd made that mistake. Who would notice it, you might wonder? Well, her target audience. If you're writing a novel set in the 1970s, your target audience is probably going to be women in their 50s and 60s who remember the 70s, or people who just love that era. And you have to be careful about the details. It is a fact that wherever your story is set, you're going to have readers who buy your book precisely because they love that setting, whether it's the Wild West, the exotic Middle East, or a modern circus. Those readers are going to know, they're going to read a lot about that era, and they will catch every mistake, and they don't like mistakes. Just when I started writing this presentation, I found an article by Maura Allen from the writingworld.com e-zine, and it's writing-world.com, good little e-zine. And this was a little essay she wrote that I'm going to rather cherry pick here to get the right quotes. But she says, you can be sure that whether you set your tale in Delhi or Detroit or Dublin, you will attract readers who are intimately familiar with the locale. When a writer makes errors in facts, that illusion of reality is shattered. Your suspension of disbelief is shattered. Disgruntled readers tend to be vocal readers, with many ways to spread the word about writers who displease them. Readers who feel that a work lacks accuracy or authenticity do not hesitate to declare their dissatisfaction via such venues as Amazon reviews, blogs, and social media. They're going to get you. None of us wants to make a reader say, "I'll never pick up another book by that author again." Now, my second example is for poets. I don't know if there's any poets listening, but when do poets need to do research? Well, this very famous poem called On First Looking into Chapman's Homer by John Keats in the 18th century begins, "Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen." You might remember that from middle school. The poem is all about wonder, and it's a beautiful poem. But at one point he says, like stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise. The poem is supposed to express the wonder that these European men felt on seeing the Pacific for the first time. There's a problem, though. Cortez never saw the Pacific Ocean. Cortez is the guy who invaded Mexico City, which at that time was called Tenochtitlan, and he overthrew Montezuma and conquered the Aztecs. Balboa is the man who came into the Pacific. So instead of being taught as a beautiful poem, a lot of teachers teach this poem as the biggest example of a literary goof in history. So the bottom line is that poets need to fact check. And my third example is The Quarter Moon Rose at Twilight. I actually read this in a novel once. It was set in Italy, and the protagonist is walking at twilight, and he sees the quarter moon rise. She sees, actually. It was a woman. Now, you don't have to be a scientist to know that this is impossible. All you had to do, really, all the author had to do, was look up in the sky at twilight to see where the moon was. But she didn't bother to do that, and that made me so angry that, she would mislead her readers that way. Quarter moons no more rise at twilight than the sun would rise in the west. So often research is just observation. Oops. There we go. Next slide. Here's the next slide. There we go. Your readers will know if you don't do your research. For fiction, you want your reader to stay up till 3 a.m. with your book. Nothing should boot them out of the story. And for nonfiction, remember you're selling your expertise, and nothing should make the reader doubt that. Now that's the first reason to do research. The second reason is that research adds color and texture to a story. I chose an example of this as Lauren Hillenbrandt's Unbroken. And I have a couple of reasons for choosing this book. I could have chosen 1,000. There are so many books where the historical research gives them so much flavor they really make the book. Lauren Hillenbrandt also wrote Seabiscuit a few years ago, but Unbroken is the story of Louis Zamperini. And he was raised in my hometown, Torrance. He was a runner. He was pegged by many people in the 1930s as the guy who would break the 1-minute mile. But unfortunately, World War II intervened, and he ended up on a plane in the Pacific. He wasn't a pilot. He was a gunner, I think. And anyway, his plane was eventually shot down. He and another guy survived 7 or 8 weeks on a raft in the Pacific, living on rainwater and an occasional fish or bird that they managed to catch. They were finally found, but they were found by the Japanese. So he spent the rest of World War II in a prison of war camp in mainland Japan. And unfortunately, at that point, he came under the control of an absolute sadist whose one goal was to break Zamperini, and hence the title of the novel. The reason I wanted to use this book is full of research, and it tells you all about the way he was raised, that you feel the wind in the South Pacific, you feel the heat, you feel the hopelessness of the prison camp. But the woman who wrote it never was able to even leave her house to do her research. She did interviews by phone. She did about 90 interviews with Zamperini himself. She has chronic fatigue syndrome, and in spite of that, she manages to turn out these incredible novels. So I'm not going to whine about the research I have to do because she is just doing an amazing job even with her challenges. Research makes a story believable. I put up some books here that most people will recognize. Even if you're not a horror fan, you probably know Stephen King's work. His last book was about time travel, and I read it, 11/22/63. It puts you in the 60s, in the early 60s. It's just incredible. Other writers, Diana Gabaldon, Anne Rice, they're famous for their research. Their books come alive because of all the little details about how a room is furnished, what kind of plants are outside the window. Couple of books, The Great Gatsby and Dracula, are contemporary novels. The Great Gatsby was written in the early 20s. Dracula was written in the 1890s. And the authors picked just the right details that even almost 100 years later, the novel comes alive for us. We really feel they're there. We're there. Even made-up worlds like Harry Potter and George R.R. Martin are filled with details. In this case, they come out of the author's imagination, but they're consistent. And if you've ever read a Game of Thrones, he has imagined a world like Tolkien did in Lord of the Rings. He knows the type of weapon and the type of uniform and the type of symbol that every major house uses. So Harry Potter, again, it's magical, but it's out of her imagination, but it's also heavily researched and brings in all these old myths. And I put my own novel up there just because I wanted to. I did a lot of research on that, too. It was a lot of fun. Ditto with nonfiction works. Historical books like Team of Rivals, of course, have to be heavily researched. Children's books, this one I have up is Raising Lucy. Even though they're short, everything in them has to be absolutely accurate. Devil in the White City is a heavily researched book about the Chicago World's Fair and a serial killer that was operating at the World's Fair and was not caught until years later. All these books are heavily researched, and that's what makes them great books. I brought one example up of what can happen when you don't do your research, and that's 3 Cups of Tea by Greg Mortensen. He, unfortunately, he may be a wonderful guy. I don't know him. He builds schools in poor areas of the world. And the story is that he was on a mountain climbing expedition. He got lost. He nearly died. He stumbled into a village where the villagers took care of him, nursed him back to health, could not have been kinder. And in return, he decided to build them a school. And one thing led to another, and he started raising funds to build schools all over the region, especially for girls. The problem is that he didn't get his facts right in the book. He made lots of mistakes. It threw aspersions on his work. He was the subject of a 60 Minutes documentary, which no one ever wants to be. And people have also attacked his charities, and his bookkeeping is sloppy. So bad research can bite you in ways you don't even anticipate. So that's that. Now, how do you do it? The first point I'd like to make is that you are your own best researcher. Remember that your story is going to be set somewhere. You have to let your reader know how that place feels and how it looks and what it sounds like. Is it hot or is it cold? So you use your eyes, ears, nose, your sense of touch and taste to tell the reader exactly what they should be feeling. Wherever you go, be a keen observer. Take pictures, take notes, take high-density pictures of every little thing. And like I said, even what the air tastes like, even what the sky looks like. You know, in California, we have this wonderful golden light, and people comment on it because in other areas of the world, the light is not that golden. If you go to Europe, the skies are very white and gray and icy. When I went to France, I took a lot of vacation photos like everybody else does, the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, but I also took tons of pictures of nature because my story takes place 2,000 years ago. I took pictures of forests and of fruit trees in the springtime when they had all the blossoms on. I took pictures of the coast because the second half of my book takes place in Brittany along the coast. I took pictures. I even stood over this tide pool down here in the lower left where the tide was going out, and it was an interesting shot. And if this was not a PowerPoint slide, I would zoom in on it so you could see the detail. But on the lower right, I took pictures of an herb that grows along the side of the road. It's something we call Queen Anne's lace, but they didn't call it Queen Anne's lace 2,000 years ago. I came up with another name, but I wanted to take pictures of that so that I could remember how to describe it. All this, wherever you go, scoop up brochures about local flora and fauna, brochures about local sites. If you're going to be thinking, gee, maybe I'll have my character come here and have dinner at this restaurant, grab a menu, take pictures, and make sure that you can give them accurate information about it. And when it comes to looking for books, you want to haunt bookstores and library sales. I'll tell you that books from university presses are the best because those presses have reputations to uphold, so they do review the books. They have expert historians review the books so that they're free of error. Children's books are not bad to get either. Let's say you wanted to write a novel about a kid who ran away and joined the circus in the 19th century. If you remember the story of Toby Tyler that Disney did, something like that. You'd want to look for books about the circus. Now, I want to remind you that if you're writing a book right now, it's going to come out in 2014 or 2015. When your readers hear the word circus, they're going to think Cirque du Soleil. And when they hear orphanage or orphan, they're going to think of Annie, or they're going to think of the foster home system. So it's up to you to paint a new world for them. You're going to have to tell them exactly what kind of circus you have in mind. So you're going to need books like this, books on the history of the circus, circus in Victorian society. I kind of did a Google search to find these. And not just these books, but don't neglect the other things in the person's life. If you're writing on the 19th century, you might want to get a book on 19th century clothing. There's a series of books called The Writer's Guide to Everyday Life. This is the one in the 1800s. I have one called The Writer's Guide to Everyday Life in the Wild West. Here's a book on orphans. You have to be able to describe everything. A very rich source of information is biographies and diaries, because that's where you'll find little things that aren't often mentioned in the bigger books. Like, for example, the fact that circuses back in the days were riddled with fleas. You couldn't get away from them. You had all these animals, and people were constantly complaining about the fleas. You can also look at fiction books. Water for Elephants takes place in the 1930s, but the author, Sarah Gruen, if you can find some interviews by her, she really went deep into the history of the circus and had a lot of information on it. So that's another one to get. Now, where do you find these books? I would recommend two places, Wikipedia and Google Books. Now, Wikipedia first. I wouldn't advise anyone to take information from Wikipedia without checking it and vetting it, because anybody can write anything on Wikipedia. You don't know if the article's good or not. But what you want to do is open up Wikipedia, type in whatever you're looking for, a search term, and then go to the end of the article. And at the end of the article, you're going to find tons of things like notes, reference, external links, citations. Some articles even have a full-on bibliography. Some of the sources are linked, as they are on this one, and a lot of them have the name of a book, the author's name, possibly a link, but at least you've got names of sources, articles, books, and all sorts of things that you can go look up. That's where this author says he got his information. That's where you can get good information. The other place to look at is Google. Now, I did a Google look on circus history here and just did a search and got these results. But what you want to do if you want to find books is type in your search terms, and instead of clicking on search, go up to the Google bar and go all the way over to more and drag down to books. And this will bring you the actual books that Google has scans. Google has scanned tens of thousands of books into their database. There were actually court cases about it, of whether they had the right to do this. A lot of the books they've scanned in are completely out of print. They're rare. You'd have a hard time finding them. But as you can see here, the very first book, 1959, A History of the Circus in America. I doubt that many people will have that. Now it says snippet view here, and snippet view means they're only going to show you a paragraph or two. They're going to look for this phrase that I entered, Circus History in America. They're going to look for those words in the book. I did not put quotes around the phrase. Probably all of you know that if you put quotes around the phrase, Google will look for the entire phrase. But I didn't do that, so it's just looking for these words. Sometimes you get a preview. So go ahead and click on one of the books that you find under Google Books, and this is what you get. On the left, you get all of the publishing information. In this case, I happened to click on a book that is still in print. It's from the Oxford University Press. It's the Oxford Companion to United States History, a section on circuses. So because it's still in print, all these sources came up of where it could be bound. But you will get a picture of the book, usually. You'll get the editors, the authors, and all the publishing information. You'd have to scroll down a bit on this one to get it. On the right, you have the page where your search terms appear, and Google is thoughtful enough to highlight that for you so you can see where they occur. I want to warn you about using the search bar on the right to scroll through Google Books, because remember, you're looking at a whole book. If you touch that scroll bar, sometimes it moves you 10 or 30 pages away, and you may have to reload the page to get back to where you were before. But you'll see there's all sorts of little things up here that can help you find what you need out of the book. You can go to previous or next mentions. But basically, for our purposes, we want to find the book. So you want this publishing information down here. So now you have the list of books that you want. Let's say you've looked at Wikipedia and you've looked on Google Books. You've got a list. I know what I want. How do I get it? You don't want to have to buy them all. So you just go to your local library. And you want to do what's called an interlibrary loan, ILL. Every library will do this for you. You can take your list and go into the library and go right up to the reference librarian and sit down with her or him, and they will order the books for you. You can absolutely do that. You do not have to use the internet to do that. I like to use the internet because I could do this at night. I can do this at any time. And the way you do that at home on your computer is you bring up your library's web page. I brought up Palos Verdes Library. You look on the web page for something called research. It might say research resources or resources. It might say internet resources. But you look for something that's going to connect you with that library's internet resources. And I clicked on that. I got this page, all these different resource things that the library has available. I want to go to WorldCat. WorldCat stands for World Catalog. It's a worldwide catalog of all the books held in libraries. Now right under it, it says ILL2, but both of these will take you to the same place. I tried ILL, it takes me to WorldCat. So just go ahead and click on WorldCat. And then you'll be asked to enter your library card. And I didn't take a picture of that, of course, but afterwards you get this screen, and it is basically the same no matter what library you're using. You have a search box at top and at bottom, and you have all these things you can type in to find your book. Now, if you don't have a list of books to begin with and you want to just type in subjects and keywords, you can do that. But if you have a list of books, you can type in the title on the first line, and over here where it says keyword, you go to the right where that little arrow is that points downward. If you were to click on that, you could change keyword to title or author or subject or any one of a number of things. So you can type in the title, type in the author on the next line, and have the book go look. Have the WorldCat go look for the book. I typed in, for the purposes of illustration, Olvera Street, Los Angeles. And here's the results I got. There's 55 books, and if you want to see just the books, you can click on this tab, Altogether, there were 404 sources. It looks like 173 of them are photos. So if you wanted photographs, you'd look at that. 163 of them are internet sources. There are actually 6 musical scores that have the words Olvera Street in them. And I'm not sure what the archival and sound are, but usually you go right to books. I want to point out that in this case, it's thoughtfully telling me that one of the books is already in the library, Palos Verdes Library District, but I'm going to click on the very first book that's on here. It's a 1946 book. I wonder which libraries will have that. And when I click on a book title, of course, it brings up all the information, all the details, and it tells me 864 libraries in the world own that book. Now, I can click on this to see which libraries those are. I think that would be kind of useless because I don't need to know that. I can just go down here to Internet Library Loan or ILL Request. Either one of these buttons, either one of these links will take me to the same place. I click on that and I'm basically ordering the book. I'm asking the library to get the book for me. I may be asked for my library card again. That sometimes happens. I'll also probably be informed that there's a $2 charge associated with getting a book. That's the charge that the Palos Verdes Library makes. Other libraries charge differently. I think the Los Angeles City Library charges $5 or $6. So you might want to check around and see which library is cheapest. But there is a charge to get an interlibrary loan book. Couple more words about libraries while we're here. I would get cards at as many libraries as possible because they all have different resources available. I would get on their mailing list so that you get their calendar each month because most libraries have people put on talks, and sometimes they're local authors, sometimes they're people talking about how to self-publish a book. At times, I went to one at the Palos Verdes Library last month where they had a National Archives link, and they downloaded a big presentation from the National Archives in St. Louis about how to find personnel records for military and civilian agencies going back to World War I. It was fascinating. So you never know what they're going to have, so I definitely check them out. And the last thing I'll say about libraries is make the librarian your best friend. Don't ever, ever be rude to a librarian. They can find so many things for you that you never even dreamed existed. So really, be very polite and very lovely to them. Let's see. Now that you're getting books and you're going to start gathering information, I want to give practical suggestions for organizing that information. And the first thing, and it's very important, is to keep a record of all your sources. Even if you go through a book and you find out there's nothing in there that you can use, make a record of it so that you know you checked that book. As you start to read a lot of books, a year or so down the line, you're going to forget the title of every book you read. And you might find yourself reading a book that you read already, which is a huge waste of time. So keep a list so that you'll always know, yeah, I read that already. I don't have to go back and check it again. I like to put it on Excel, but you don't have to. The advantage of Excel is that you can alphabetize your list. I alphabetized this one by subject. And these are some of the sources I'm using for my current book, which is on baby boomer Christmas trivia. So that's why all the A's came up first, but I could also alphabetize it according to type. So I'd have all my books together, all my websites together. But you don't have to do it that way. You can put it on Word. You can keep a handwritten list. But just please keep track of your sources because it's impossible to go back and find them afterwards if you don't. And especially if you're writing a nonfiction book, you might want to think about how you're going to cite it. Academic books are footnoted. They have citations. They have bibliographies in back. If you're even thinking of doing that, please start out doing it because it's almost impossible to go back and add all the citations and footnotes afterwards if you get halfway through it. So think about that now and where you're going to cite your sources. You also need to organize your research. And I think almost everybody finds that they have to resort to both physical files and computer files. You've got to have both. If you find, you'll find lots of things in books where you'll be photocopying pages from books and making a note of what book they came from. I also very often just photocopy the title page of the book and staple it to the sources. To put that on the computer means I'd have to scan all those pages, and that would be silly. Let's see. And if you are doing internet research, you don't want to have to print out every page you come across that might be useful. What I did with Death Speaker, I showed a little bit of it here. I'd look for lists of herbs and fruits and things that people were eating back then. I'd find a good website with lots of information, and I'd just drag across it and copy all that information and the pictures, copy it onto a Word document, and save it in the nature section. So you can see I have things on herbs, things on hemlock, the harvest season. I found a PDF. Berry cap is an herb. For the physical file, I got myself a great big accordion folder with about 10 pockets, and I had a pocket for the Roman army and what they looked like. I had a pocket for Druids and religion. I had a pocket for maps of France. So you're going to be saving lots of stuff, so set up your files for it. Record all your expenses. When you start selling your book, you're going to have to pay taxes on the money you make, the millions of dollars that you make. We wish. So you defray those taxes by claiming proper deductions, like you can claim the mileage to and from the library, to and from stores. You can claim anything you spend on office supplies, software, your computer, any repairs to your computer, the Internet Library Loan charges, and photocopies. All these things are deductible, so get a shoebox and start saving things. One other thing I did was to keep a list by my side as I was writing for questions that came up, because you don't always, especially if you're writing fiction and you're caught up in your story, you don't want to just stop in the middle of something and go have to look up a fact. So just make a note of the question, and you can look it up later. Example might be if you have a person who's in New York and they're at Kennedy Center and they're going to hop into a taxi cab and go to Wall Street. Well, you might make a note and look up later. How long of a drive is that? How hard is it to get a taxi? What do taxis charge? You can find out all that stuff later and add it into the story if you think you should, you know. I had to look up how to make butter. Other things that I had on my list, and bear in mind that my story takes place 2,000 years ago, were things like how far would people walk in a day back then. I had to take my characters from one side of France to the other, and I kind of had to make a guess as to how long it was going to take them to get there. So I had to look up how, you know, travelers using roads, how far would they get in a day? How long does it take a broken hip to mend? Because I did that to one of my characters. And I had that question with me, and I actually ran into a fellow writer who had a cousin who was a doctor at UCLA Medical Center, and within a couple of days, I had this nice long email from the doctor explaining to me exactly how long it took a broken hip to mail, given my character's age, and all the things that to heal, given my character's age, and all the things that could go wrong. So that was great. So keep a list. And then we're going to talk about internet sources. I want to say a word about pictures, because this always comes up every panel I've ever been to. People ask about the pictures. And I have to say that every picture is owned by someone unless you took it yourself. And even if you took it yourself, you have to have, if there are other people in the picture, you have to have their permission to use that picture. That requirement ends when they die. So if you have a picture of Babe Ruth, that your dad took. You can use it. You took that picture. And he is gone, so you don't need his permission. But most pictures are owned by somebody. And even ads and photos of defunct companies. In my current research effort with all the baby boomer trivia, there's lots of stores that went bankrupt and lots of companies that went belly up or got absorbed in the 60s or 70s. But the fact is that the heirs of the old owners still own rights to a lot of those logos and images and pictures. Other companies that bought out the old firm own a lot of the old ads and pictures. And in fact, they may have just bought the company's name and all the goodwill associated with it, but they may have inherited all these old ads and pictures. So you have to check. You can't assume that something is public domain. Lawyers, as I said, I go to panels and discussions, and people will ask lawyers about this, and they're more and more cautious every year that passes. So be careful. Don't get yourself into trouble. I will say that if you're using pictures on a blog, nobody really cares that much. It's when you put those pictures into a book that libraries and universities and archives and companies expect to be paid for those pictures, or at least expect that you will ask them for permission to use it. Here's some sites where you can find photos, public domain photos, that are fine to use. Now, there's a, let me make sure, there is a materials tab on this presentation. And yes, it's there. I put a Word document up that lists the sites on these last few slides. All 4 of these photo slides are on it, so you can just download that Word document instead of scribbling away furiously now trying to catch all these sites. But WikiCommons, morguefile.com, alame.com, and Stock Exchange are all good places to find royalty-free or public domain photos. They also carry fee photos, so make sure that that the one you select is royalty-free. I can hear you. There we go. I also have a few resources up that I think are very useful. Everybody's research is different, so I had to go very general here. I included Internet Movie Database. That's what IMDb stands for. And again, these sites are all on that Word document. IMDb has everything associated with movies. If you want to know the date and place where a movie premiere was held, if you want to know who the gaffer was on a film, if you want to know who handled the publicity or the craft services, if you want to know the day that Davy Crockett TV show first aired, on what station and who sponsored it, you can find all that on IMDb. The next couple of sites are more for science. NOAA, government site, wonderful information. A lot of it's for kids and students, but they'll tell you how storms form, what oil spills do to the landscape, things like that. The Public Library of Science has tons of research. And if you're looking for old books, just whole books, here are 3 sites that have them online, starting with the Gutenberg organization, which is like the granddaddy of all of them. More online resources. Encyclopedia.com uses Collier's Encyclopedia, and it is free. Here are a couple of sites that collect and link to other research websites, and they're organized by subject. So you go to IPL.org or Infomine, and you type in zoology, and you find all these sites that you could link to. The Library of Congress has a great site if you're looking for anything about American culture and history. And How Stuff Works, which I've been using since the 1990s, when it was just a few basic things like how a pump works, and they had line drawings. Well, now it's very sophisticated, and they've got everything from how warp drive would theoretically work, to stain removal, to how the muscles in your throat work when you swallow. So if you need more, you can do what I did, which was Google best research sites, and you'll find all these. And I found one more just before we started this program. One more find, USA.gov. I was browsing through a Smithsonian magazine, Killing Time, earlier, and I found this great graphic showing all the stuff on USA.org. Unfortunately, my scanner would not work, so I just went to the website and I clicked on topics so that you could see all the things that are on here. There's tons of stuff, and your tax dollars paid for this, basically, so you might as well use it. And that's basically it. That is my whole topic. I'll be happy to entertain any questions. But again, the list of the websites is on materials. The only one missing from that Word document is USA.gov because I just discovered it. But are there any questions? Alan, are you still there?
Yes, I certainly am.
Okay. I haven't put you to sleep?
No, this is typical of you. It's been thorough, great. Thank you.
Okay, you're quite welcome.
Complete. I want to ask, is it possible to get a copy of each of these images?
You know, I hadn't put it up, but yes, I will be. I think I can still put stuff up. I'll put it. I'll put a copy of the PowerPoint presentation up in the same place where the materials are. Okay?
That'd be real great. Thank you.
Okay, I will do that. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and we'll see you.
Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, let's end the recording first, and then we can put that up.